It was a quiet, chilly night, and the streets were almost empty. Naomi Bennett, a senior officer dressed in simple clothes, was driving home after a long and tiring day at work. The air outside was cold, her breath slightly fogging the car's window as she exhaled. The faint hum of her car's engine was the only sound in the stillness of the night. Suddenly, the piercing wail of a police siren broke the silence. Bright red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror, making her heart skip a beat. The screech of tires echoed as the patrol car came to an abrupt stop behind her. Naomi's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her calm face hiding the unease she felt inside. As the patrol car's door slammed shut, heavy footsteps approached her vehicle. Naomi rolled down her window just slightly, enough to let the cold night air rush in. Her thoughts raced. Why was she being stopped? The officer's shadow loomed closer, his flashlight cutting through the darkness and shining directly into her car. Something about his sharp, hurried movements told her this wasn't going to be an ordinary stop. Before we dive into this powerful story, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss more inspiring and thought-provoking videos like this one. Your support helps us share impactful stories that matter. Now, let's get started. Naomi Bennett was a woman of quiet strength and unshakable integrity. In her 40s, she had earned a reputation as one of the most respected senior officers in the department. Her colleagues admired her not just for her intelligence and dedication, but for her unwavering sense of fairness. Naomi had spent the day in back-to-back meetings, addressing departmental issues and mentoring younger officers who looked up to her as a guide and role model. Now, all she wanted was to get home, relax with a cup of tea, and prepare for another demanding day. Driving her modest car through the quiet streets, Naomi's thoughts wandered. She wasn't one for luxury. Her plain clothes and simple lifestyle reflected her values. Tonight, she wore a casual sweater and jeans, blending in as just another person on the road. The badge that symbolized her authority was tucked away in her bag, and the polished image of her office was far behind her. But Naomi's peaceful drive was about to take a sharp turn. Behind her, Officer Reed, a young patrol officer in his late 20s, was scanning the streets for anyone who caught his eye. Reed had a history of pushing boundaries, whether it was through his aggressive tone, unnecessary stops, or quick temper. He wielded his badge like a weapon. He was known for his arrogance and a troubling disregard for the very principles the department stood for. As soon as he spotted Naomi's car, Reed's focus narrowed. To him, it was just another opportunity to exercise his authority, to show who was in charge. He flipped on his siren and lights without a second thought, speeding up behind her vehicle. Naomi noticed the flashing lights in her mirror and let out a deep breath, pulling her car to the side of the road. Her instincts told her this wasn't a routine stop. There was something off about the hurried way Reed parked his car and approached hers. She glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror, her calm expression masking the unease building inside her. "Let's see what this is about," she muttered to herself, gripping the wheel as the young officer's shadow fell over her window. Naomi Bennett rolled down her car window as Officer Reed approached, his flashlight cutting through the dark interior of her vehicle. The young officer's expression was hard and unwelcoming, his stance tense. It wasn't the first time Naomi had encountered such behavior, but it was still unsettling. "License and registration," Reed barked, his tone clipped and sharp with not a hint of courtesy. Naomi glanced at him calmly, handing over her documents without a word. She was used to remaining composed, especially in situations where tension lingered in the air. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady, though she already had a feeling this wasn't going to be a simple interaction. Reed took the documents and gave her a once-over, his gaze lingering on her casual clothes and tired face. There was a flash of judgment in his eyes, and his lips curled slightly, as if he had already made up his mind about who she was. "You were driving a little slow back there," he said, though his tone suggested that wasn't the real reason for the stop. "Where are you headed at this hour?" Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Home," she replied simply, her gaze meeting his without flinching. Reed leaned closer, shining the flashlight into the car as if searching for something. "What's in the bag?" he asked, motioning to her work bag sitting on the passenger seat. His tone was unnecessarily suspicious, as if he was looking for a reason to escalate the situation. "It's just my work bag," Naomi said, keeping her voice neutral. "Nothing illegal, if that's what you're wondering." Reed's mouth twisted into a smirk. "You mind if I take a look?" he said, not waiting for permission before stepping back and motioning for her to exit the vehicle. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. There was no reason for this level of scrutiny, and she knew it. But she also knew better than to react impulsively. She stepped out of the car, her movements slow and deliberate. Reed's eyes narrowed as he looked her over again. "Kinda late to be out driving, don't you think?" he said, his words dripping with condescension. "What do you do anyway?" Naomi hesitated, debating whether to reveal her identity. "I work in law enforcement," she said carefully, hoping to gauge his reaction. Reed scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "Law enforcement, huh? Funny, you don't look the part," he said, his eyes scanning her again. "More like someone who doesn't belong around here." The words hit Naomi like a slap. She had spent years fighting against this very kind of prejudice, and yet here she was, being judged and demeaned based on nothing but her appearance. Inside, frustration simmered, but she refused to let it show. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" she asked, her tone measured. Reed stepped back, crossing his arms. "Just making sure everything's in order," he said, his smirk returning. "You know, we have to be extra careful these days. Never know who's up to no good." Naomi felt a wave of disbelief. She had worked tirelessly to uphold justice, to ensure accountability in her department, and here she was, being treated like a suspect for no reason. She wanted to call him out, to remind him of the oath he had taken, but she knew this wasn't the time for a confrontation. As Reed turned away to inspect her car, Naomi clenched her fists, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She had faced challenges before, but something about this moment felt heavier, like it wasn't just about her, but about the larger fight for fairness and respect. She watched Reed with quiet resolve, determined to handle the situation with dignity, even as frustration and disbelief churned inside her. Officer Reed circled Naomi's car like a predator assessing its prey. The beam of his flashlight darted across the vehicle's interior, lingering unnecessarily on mundane items: a notebook, a coffee thermos, her work bag. "Pop the trunk," he ordered curtly, barely looking at her. Naomi stood by the driver's side, her breath visible in the chilly air. "Officer, with all due respect, is there a reason for this search?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Reed turned to face her, his expression a mix of irritation and smug authority. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Unless you have something to hide, there shouldn't be a problem." Naomi's jaw tightened, but she nodded. She walked to the trunk, opened it, and stepped aside. It was nearly empty except for a pair of gym shoes and a folded jacket. Reed inspected it as if he expected contraband to magically appear. Satisfied, or perhaps disappointed, he slammed the trunk shut and stalked back to the driver's seat. I need more proof of who you are, he said abruptly. Show me another form of ID. Naomi raised an eyebrow. You already have my license. That should be enough. Reed took a step closer, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. Ma'am, I'm asking you again. Do you have another ID? The deliberate placement of his hand on his weapon didn't go unnoticed. Naomi felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to show fear. Years of training had taught her to remain composed, no matter the circumstances. I do, she said slowly, reaching into her bag with deliberate, measured movements. She pulled out her work ID, holding it out for him to see. Reed snatched it and inspected it with exaggerated care, his smirk briefly faltering when he saw her title, Director of Internal Affairs, but his arrogance quickly returned. Huh, he muttered, handing the ID back. Doesn't mean you're above the law. Naomi tucked the ID back into her bag, her patience wearing thin. No one is above the law, Officer Reed, she said evenly. That includes you. Reed's smirk disappeared entirely. He stepped back, scanning the small crowd that had started to gather nearby. A few passers-by had paused, their curiosity piqued by the escalating tension. Some were filming on their phones, capturing every moment. Naomi noticed the murmurs of the crowd. She could feel their eyes on her, a mixture of concern and unease in their expressions. This was no longer just about her, it was becoming a public spectacle. Reed seemed to notice too, and it only made him more agitated. He turned back to Naomi, his body language stiff, his tone more confrontational. Step away from the car, he barked. She complied, moving a few steps to the side. Reed began rifling through the car's interior, pulling out her work bag and opening it without permission. He dumped its contents onto the passenger seat, her notebook, a pen, her badge, and some papers. Is this really necessary? Naomi asked, her voice tinged with restrained frustration. I'm the one asking the questions, Reed snapped. His hand hovered near his holster again, a clear intimidation tactic. The crowd began to stir more audibly, their whispers turning into quiet commentary. She hasn't done anything, someone said. This is harassment. Naomi's heart pounded, but she kept her composure. She met Reed's glare steadily, refusing to be rattled. She knew she had to play this carefully. Reacting out of anger could make things worse, for herself and for anyone watching. Reed's search yielded nothing incriminating, as she knew it would. Still, he wasn't ready to let go of his authority. You're awfully calm for someone in this situation, he said, his tone accusatory. That usually means one of two things. You're hiding something, or you think you're too important to answer to me. Naomi let out a slow breath, choosing her words carefully. I'm calm because I have nothing to hide, she said, and because I trust that the truth will come out, whether you like it or not. Reed's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on his belt. Is that a threat? No, Naomi replied firmly. It's a fact. The crowd was growing, their phones still recording. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Reed seemed to realize he was losing control, not just of the situation, but of the narrative. One of the bystanders spoke up. Leave her alone. She hasn't done anything. Reed turned toward the crowd, his face red with anger. Mind your business, he shouted, but the interruption seemed to rattle him. Naomi took a small step forward, her voice steady but low enough for only Reed to hear. The more you push, the worse this is going to look. For you. Reed froze, his hand hovering near his holster one last time. For a moment it seemed like he might push further, but the weight of the eyes on him, The cameras, the murmurs, Naomi's calm defiance finally made him step back. "This isn't over," he muttered, walking back toward his patrol car. Naomi watched him go, her heart pounding but her expression unshaken. The crowd stayed quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up against everything Reed represented. Naomi stood silently as Officer Reed returned to her car for yet another round of unnecessary questions. Her patience was wearing thin, but she knew this moment required precision. The crowd had grown, their murmurs becoming louder, some bold enough to call out Reed's behavior. Cameras continued to capture everything, and she was well aware that this footage might soon find its way online. Reed, still clinging to his authority, stopped in front of her with a smug expression. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "If you'd just cooperate, we could have avoided all this." Naomi's steady gaze didn't waver. Her voice was calm but firm. "I've cooperated fully, officer. You've searched my car, my bag, and demanded unnecessary proof of identity. At this point, I'm curious. What exactly are you trying to prove?" Reed's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, leaning in slightly as if to intimidate her. "I'm proving that no one is above the law. Not you, not anyone." Naomi tilted her head, her calm demeanor unshaken. "Then perhaps it's time you learned exactly who I am." She reached into her bag and carefully pulled out her badge, her Internal Affairs Director's badge. She held it up, letting the silver insignia catch the light. The murmurs in the crowd turned into audible gasps. Reed's eyes widened as he focused on the badge. His overconfident smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. "What is this?" he demanded, though his voice had lost its edge. "This," Naomi said evenly, "is proof that I'm the Director of Internal Affairs for this state. I oversee the conduct of officers like you, and what I've seen here tonight is nothing short of misconduct." Reed took an involuntary step back, his face flushing red. I didn't know," he stammered, trying to maintain some semblance of authority. "You should have said something earlier." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "And why should I have to? You've profiled me, searched me without cause, and attempted to intimidate me, all without ever considering that I might be more than what you assumed." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The crowd watched, riveted as the power dynamic visibly shifted. Reed was no longer the one in control. His defensive stance and nervous glances toward the growing audience revealed his fear. Naomi continued, her voice steady but firm. "What you've done tonight is not just a breach of protocol, it's a betrayal of the oath you took to serve and protect. You've targeted me based on nothing more than bias, and I won't let that slide." Reed opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His gaze darted to the onlookers, many of whom were still recording. The realization that his actions might soon be reviewed, not just by Naomi but by the public, seemed to paralyze him. Naomi took a step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "This isn't just about me, Officer Reed. It's about every person you've treated this way, every abuse of power you've committed, thinking no one would hold you accountable. Well, I'm holding you accountable." Reed swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling. "Look, I didn't mean what?" Naomi cut him off, her tone sharp. "Didn't mean to stop me without cause? Didn't mean to intimidate me with your hand on your weapon? Or didn't mean to let your prejudice guide your actions tonight?" For the first time, Reed had no response. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by the look of someone who realized they had made a grave mistake. Naomi took a deep breath, her gaze briefly shifting to the crowd before returning to Reed. This isn't just about him, she thought. This is about the system that allows officers like him to think they can act without consequence. She thought about all the times she had fought to bring about change within the department, only to be met with resistance. Reed wasn't the first officer to act this way, and she knew he wouldn't be the last. But tonight, she had the chance to make an example of him, to show everyone watching that justice and accountability weren't just words, but actions. Straightening her posture, Naomi spoke clearly, her voice carrying not just authority but conviction. "I'll be filing an official report on this incident, and I'll make sure every second of it is reviewed. You've violated the trust placed in you as an officer of the law, and there will be consequences." The crowd began to murmur louder, some cheering quietly, others shaking their heads at Reed's behavior. The officer stood frozen, his hands fidgeting nervously by his sides. Naomi turned to the crowd, addressing them with a calm but powerful tone. "This is why accountability matters. No one is above the law, not civilians, and certainly not the officers sworn to uphold it. If you ever face a situation like this, don't be afraid to stand up and demand fairness. It's your right." She glanced back at Reed one last time, her expression resolute. "I hope tonight serves as a lesson, for you and for anyone watching. Abuse of power will not go unchecked." With that, she walked back to her car, leaving Reed standing there, his arrogance shattered. The crowd parted to let her through, some applauding quietly, others nodding in agreement. Naomi knew this wasn't the end, but it was a step forward, a moment that would ripple far beyond this single night. By the next morning, the events of the previous night were already making waves. A video of Officer Reed's actions, recorded by a bystander, had gone viral. The footage captured every moment: Reed's aggressive behavior, his unnecessary searches, his dismissive tone, and most importantly, Naomi's calm yet firm responses. The caption under the video read, "Abuse of power exposed. Watch a senior officer shut down a racist cop in real time." Social media exploded with reactions. Thousands of people shared the video, expressing outrage over Reed's behavior and applauding Naomi for standing her ground. Comments poured in, ranging from disbelief at Reed's actions to admiration for Naomi's composure. At the precinct, Naomi wasted no time. She walked into her office, still in the same casual clothes from the night before, and began typing up her report. Every detail of the incident was laid out with precision. Reed's unwarranted stop, his baseless demands, his attempts at intimidation. She attached the video evidence, knowing it would leave no room for excuses. As the head of internal affairs, Naomi had the authority to launch an immediate investigation, and she did just that. By midday, Reed was summoned to the department, where he was met with stern faces and a thick file documenting the complaints against him. Sitting across from Naomi in the conference room, Reed looked nothing like the overconfident officer from the night before. His posture was slouched, his face pale. He tried to defend himself, stumbling over his words. I didn't know it was you," he stammered. "I thought you were just what?" Naomi interrupted, her voice calm but sharp. "Just another citizen you could profile and intimidate? That's the problem, Reed. You didn't think. You acted on bias, not facts, and you abused your power." Reed opened his mouth to respond, but Naomi held up a hand to stop him. "This isn't just about me. How many others have you treated this way? How many people didn't have the ability to fight back like I did?" Reed had no answer. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding her gaze. Naomi continued, her tone firm but not unkind. You took an oath to protect and serve. Last night, you failed that oath. The badge you wear doesn't give you the right to act above the law. It holds you to a higher standard. And if you can't meet that standard, you have no business wearing it. The decision came swiftly. Reed was placed on immediate suspension while the investigation continued. By the end of the week, the department announced his termination, citing a pattern of misconduct and failure to uphold the principles of law enforcement. The news was met with mixed reactions. Some officers grumbled about political correctness, but many, especially those Naomi had mentored, voiced their support for her actions. For Naomi, the victory was bittersweet. She knew that removing Reed was just one step in a much larger fight. Prejudice and abuse of power were systemic issues, deeply ingrained in the very institution she had dedicated her life to improving. But she also knew that change started with moments like this, holding people accountable, setting an example, and refusing to back down. That evening, Naomi sat at her kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea as she reflected on the night before. She thought about the crowd that had gathered, the people who had recorded the incident and stood as silent witnesses to her struggle. She thought about the messages she had received throughout the day, some from strangers thanking her for her courage, others from colleagues expressing their solidarity. But more than anything, she thought about the countless people who had faced similar situations without the platform or power to fight back. This isn't just about me, she reminded herself. It's about them. It's about all of us. She opened her laptop and began drafting a statement for the department. In it, she emphasized the importance of accountability and the need for systemic reform. She called for better training, stricter oversight, and a commitment to building trust between officers and the communities they served. Her statement ended with a simple but powerful message. Justice is not just about punishing the wrong. It's about building a system where the wrong can't happen in the first place. It's about creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, no matter who they are or what they look like. And it's up to us to make that world a reality. When she hit send, Naomi felt a sense of peace. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she also knew it was worth it. The video, the investigation, and Reed's termination were all proof that change was possible, even in the face of resistance. As the sun set outside her window, Naomi allowed herself a small smile. She hadn't just defended herself that night, she had sent a message that prejudice and abuse of power would not go unchecked, a message that justice, no matter how difficult, was always worth fighting for. And somewhere out there, she hoped, someone who had seen the video would find the courage to stand up, to speak out, and to believe that they too could make a difference. A week after the incident, Naomi stood at the front of the precinct's briefing room. The room was packed with officers, from rookies to seasoned veterans. The video of her encounter with Officer Reed had sparked intense discussions within the department and beyond. It was a moment that had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about bias and accountability in law enforcement. Naomi took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room. The faces staring back at her reflected a mix of emotions, some ashamed, some inspired, others uncertain. She knew this was her chance to say something meaningful, something that could push the department in the right direction. "We all saw what happened last week," she began, her voice steady and clear, "and I know it's made many of you uncomfortable. Good. It should make you uncomfortable because the moment we become complacent, the moment we stop questioning our actions and their impact, is the moment we fail the people we're sworn to serve." She paused, letting her words sink in. What happened that night wasn't just about one bad decision by one officer. It was a symptom of a deeper issue, an issue that we all have a responsibility to address. Bias, prejudice, and abuse of power have no place in this department or in any department. If we turn a blind eye, if we let it slide, we become part of the problem. Naomi stepped closer to the group, her tone softening but losing none of its conviction. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to remind you of the oath you took when you put on that badge. That oath isn't just a set of words, it's a promise to uphold justice, to treat everyone with dignity, and to be better than the mistakes of the past." The room was silent, every word hanging heavy in the air. Naomi took a deep breath and continued. "This is not an easy job. We are often put in difficult situations. But the hardest thing we'll ever do is hold up a mirror to ourselves and ask, am I doing what's right? Because if we don't stand up for what's right, who will?" She looked out at the group one last time, her gaze unwavering. "This is our chance to set an example, for ourselves, for our community, and for the generations that come after us. Let's not waste it." As she stepped back, the room remained quiet for a moment before one officer began clapping. Slowly, others joined in, until the room filled with applause. Naomi nodded in acknowledgement, her heart filled with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the struggle against prejudice and injustice was far from over. But in that moment, she also knew she wasn't alone in the fight. Change was possible, and it started with each and every one of them.